If I can just get the presentation going. Can you see that? Can everybody see that?
Not as yet. Not as yet.
So let me just keep
as while
that.
she's doing that, I'm going to ask everybody to like and share. And folks, this is going to be quite interesting. A lot of times, you know, we're not talking about Michael Lashley, and we're not talking about Bounty, and we're not talking about this, you know. But I promise you, it's going to be at least thought provoking. You might not agree with everything, but it's going to be thought provoking. So, folks, let's get our thinking caps on and stay with the program.
All right. Can you see that now by chance?
Yes. Over to you, doctor. Go right ahead.
All right. So this presentation, a couple of days ago on the news, I heard the Attorney General, there was some kind of conference on domestic violence that we hosted in Barbados. And we have a habit in Barbados. We know everything to do and say when we have people here. And then when those people go away, our problems persist. But what I found very interesting about the news clip, and I don't know if Dave has found it, if he has found it, he can share it with us. The Attorney General said that he wasn't sure if there was a link between domestic violence and the youth crime that we are experiencing in Barbados. But he's sure there must be a very Trumpian approach. I mean, when Trump does it, pardon? Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
I was saying when Trump does that kind of thing, everybody calls him out. Everybody is like, what is he talking about? He should know this, etc., etc. It was just very strange to hear the Attorney General on the radio admitting that he doesn't know what the connections between domestic violence, family instability, youth violence is. So I don't know if we found the clip, Marcia, or should I just keep going? Did we find it? Can anybody hear me?
Our police statistics demonstrate that we've had an uptick in domestic violence, but perhaps the one thing about our statistics that we have to consider is the increasing number of very young individuals who are involved in criminal activity. I think everyone says and agrees that children practice what they see. And I don't know that there's a scientifically established causal relationship between domestic violence and youth involved in crime, but I think it is almost intuitive that such a relationship would exist, because it stands to reason that a family relationship, a family environment where domestic violence is a feature is going to be a dysfunctional family. And I think our experience shows that dysfunctional families are often the breeding ground for young individuals who are involved in crime.
Now, you started the program tonight, Marcia, by highlighting the stop, hot and cold announcements, but pull back after the announcements. Part of it comes from the fact that we have a prime minister who's trying to rule by diktat, right? Which is not exactly how you rule in a democracy. In a democracy, the civil service is the one that is supposed to announce changes, coordinate for the change to go through the correct legislative process, make sure that the department who has the power to make the change is aware, knows how to roll it out to the public. But a part of the rollback situation that we have in Barbados is that we have a prime minister who wants to rule how a monarch used to rule. So you get up from the throne and you say something and it becomes law. That's not how a democracy is supposed to work. But another part of the rollback is that it seems like we have policymakers in the chair of policymaking in Barbados who don't know what it is that they're making policy around. Because if you are telling me that the Attorney General of Barbados is still guessworking about a connection between domestic violence and youth crime, that is why we cannot address crime in Barbados in any real way. Because the Attorney General just admitted on national radio for everybody to hear that he doesn't have he doesn't have the understanding. He obviously doesn't know what to do because he doesn't have the understanding, right? So this presentation started to germinate in my mind then. I've also been watching the show and the work that you have been doing around the impending, it seems like, invasion or strike that is going to come against Venezuela. What is happening, the upheaval, the political upheaval in Guyana, St. Kitts and Nevis and what is happening there, as well as, of course, what has happened in Jamaica, Haiti, and Cuba with respect to Melissa. And I have decided to fuse the two presentations together because I believe that we are a people in Barbados who can walk and chew gum. So I'm going to talk a little bit about domestic violence and the connection to what we call dysfunctional behaviors, antisocial behaviors. But I'm also going to talk about what that does to us as a Caribbean region in terms of how we deal with adversity. So impending war or impending military instability is adversity. A hurricane passing through and ravaging is instability. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to use the gender lens again tonight, but I'm going to use it in the context of talking about how we prepare for this adversity that we're facing in the Caribbean, because I didn't just want to come and put in a gender piece that wasn't connected to anything. It's interesting that you started the program the way you started it around the church. And you know my complications with the church. I'm not trying to change anybody's religion. But at the same time, as you started the program by saying, sometimes religion allows people to sit from a lofty place of judgment instead of trying to understand things in any different way. And so throughout Barbados, coming along, we would hear about generational curses, these families or these people who are troubled, and the idea that this happens because, this is this family being punished for something that the family did, quite in the same way that you were talking about how people understand what is happening in Jamaica. But as we have continued to do research about human behavior, and how human behavior is connected. So in other words, the fact that there is a link between what we call trauma and how people behave, increases in crime, but not just crime, increases in youth suicides, many of the things that we see in Barbados, not just Barbados, but across the Caribbean. So we now understand, and I don't know if we're having these conversations in Barbados, but we're definitely having them in Canada, in the United States of America, and other places where Black diaspora communities live. Trauma moves in the genes and the DNA. Just like, so, you would have a child and the child comes out and the child looks just like mommy, or the child looks just like daddy. And we are not unclear about why a child will look like mommy or daddy, right? We actually expect that. But we also inherit wounds and traumas in our bloodline. And that is proven research. Like I said, I don't know if we're talking about it in Barbados, but this is happening. And so when you're trying to understand people's behaviors, it is not even just a little boy wheeling through the streets and saying, oh, look at how he behaving, why he behaving like that. It is about understanding that his behavior sometimes is passed to him through genes and DNA. And it also mixes with what he comes to know in his childhood. So there are some people, the genes and DNA may pass through, and then because they don't have any, what we call adverse childhood experience, nothing happens. And the person is able to, not replicate the behavior that is embedded in the DNA. It's almost too like how they talk about cancer. And they say all of us have cancer. Some people's is triggered by what they eat, stress, some other thing, and some people's never is, but all of us kind of have it moving around in our body. So it's that same kind of concept. And trauma is maladjustments that the body makes to managing stress. Okay, like you say, Marcia, follow me. I'm going somewhere with this. So the effects of stress are psycho, socio, physical. Right? And I give an example of each.
Do that again. Psycho.
psycho, socio, physical. So they happen at the level of psychology, they happen at the level of society, and they happen at the physical level. And so that people can understand, I give an example of each. So at the psycho level, the one that I want to talk about tonight is the inability to be resilient. And I want to stick a pin there. I'm not explaining that any further because I do it on another slide. In terms of the socio, which is what I want to talk about now, I'll talk about this now. How we treat each other in our society matters. And it's so interesting. It's almost like you were peeping at my notes when you started the program the way you did. Because it is going to be more important now than ever how we treat to each other in the Caribbean with all that is going on. Right? So the socio part. So you will have a young person in Canada and they make an error, right? And the school provides the guidance support for them. The teachers close ranks around the child. The parents are called in. The parents accept the help. The child goes through some kind of remedial behavior for its, whatever infraction it did. And then that record is sealed and the child moves on and sometimes lives a very normal and well-adjusted life. In other ways, it doesn't happen that way. I'm not saying it's a nirvana, but what I'm saying is what the society does or does not do is going to impact on how people tolerate stress and trauma and what effects it has on a person. So you do something wrong as a teenager in Barbados. And again, everybody come down on you and they say your family got generational curses. And every time you pass the road, somebody pointing at you, they're saying something about you. It compounds the experience that you have, right? So I'm saying that what happens to each individual is not only within their body and their family, but it's also within the society. So that's why you're calling for people to close ranks around Jamaica, close ranks around Haiti, close ranks around Cuba, because how we are able to support them directly affects the outcome that they will get. And I want people to understand tonight that the support is just not to meet and all clothes. It has to also be, how do we make connections with people? How do we reach across the sea and I don't know, do a Zoom class with students who may be displaced from school? Because it's not just about your belly and what you put in your belly. It's about the overall body, right? So just like how you tell people all the time on your program, Marcia, you have programs on weekends that teach children how to read, teach young people how various skills. I saw the conky making a time back that you were doing. You take them on drives around the island, because at the end of the day, this is how we have to arrest what is going on at the level of crime. But as we talk about these storms and the impending hit on Venezuela and that kind of thing, it is also the spirit that we have to tap into to be whole as Caribbean people, right? And then the physical reactions, the example that I give here is like starting easy. So sometimes a loud motorcycle again goes down the road and people, they jump at that, what we call jumping, starting, right? So the effects are psychological, they're social, and they are physical. Now, we also are talking about a concept which we call racial trauma, right? So there are groups of people across the world who, because of their experiences, have an added layer of trauma that they experience by the virtue of being Black or being indigenous. We know about the experience of Jews and what happened around, the ethnic cleansing with Hitler and that kind of thing. So Joy DeGray, for example, and I know I've talked about this book before. It's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Okay, that's the name of the book. But then the Groy is telling us that she believes that all Black people live with a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, and she calls it specifically post-traumatic slave disorder. So let's look at some of the behaviors, right? Black people on the plantation were separated from family. So one of the coping mechanisms for that is to pretend that you don't need a family, right? Because if somebody takes something from you and it doesn't mean anything, you have lost less than if they take something from you that means something. So if you think about that and you come right through to 2025 Barbados, there are some Black people who still cannot function and operate within a family. Okay. And we say, oh, well, these people, the wicked, the what list, this. No, they're actually traumatized. And it's coming through the DNA and genes. And we are not doing enough in Barbados to rectify these patterns. Okay. So there's another scholar, Foster. I'm sorry, I sound a little bit teachery tonight. My apologies.
No,
I want people to know that this information is out there. You don't have to wait for me to give it to you. You don't have to wait for me to give it to you. There's all kinds of ways now to get books. So this is why I'm connecting the scholarship as well, so that people can go and read and get as much as they want, right? Foster does a lot of work with the experience of Black men and forced breeding. Now, you know, of course, they used to force us to have children on the plantation because it was more workers to work the plantation, right? So you have a man who is forced to have children all over. Like, just there were some men whose job on the plantation it was to just impregnate Black women for the purpose of, so they were called breeding horses, just like how you would have actual horses that you know are used to replicate to what do you say?
Reproduce.
Yes, thank you. So what happens is that men don't have an understanding of care and bonding with children. Okay. And these are the patterns that we are trying to address and change, right? But we have to first accept where we are. So if you have a situation where the young men in Barbados are not connected to a strong male figure in the family because of this racial trauma, then of course it makes sense that they're running around Barbados looking to the gun, looking to drugs, looking to antisocial behavior for the attention that it gives them. That is not rocket science, right? And there are several people that write about those kinds of things. And then you may have, you know, men who are trying to be that kind of pillar for their children, but they construct love and caring for their children as control, right? So this is where you end up now with the tug of war between the parents, for example, at the point where the relationship ends, and this one want the child and that one want the child, and the child becomes in the middle of the two of them. And I say sometimes the child drops through the gap between mommy and daddy, right? So all of that comes out of, these are features of the post-traumatic slave disorder as the Gray explains it. And then you have, separating mothers from that should be children, which is something that was done to Black women as punishment on the plantation, okay? And the Gray says what Black women have become very adept at doing is that they make children, like they hide the child under the bed, then literally. The child can't talk. It's not to go outside. It's not to play. It's just to sit down and behave, right? You have a kind of a hyper parenting. Everything is checked. Everything is covered down. And we come along in Barbadian society. We still raise children like that, and we think that is good parenting. That is not good parenting. That is parenting from a place of trauma, right? So we have our generational trauma to deal with, and some of that is racial trauma, and all of that is coming through the Caribbean. All of this is what we're dealing with. So how does it affect family structures in the Caribbean? If we are honest, we have never had very stable families in the Caribbean. That's just any of us who's grown up in the village, around the village, we know and we can admit we have high levels of family instability. That family instability is caused by poverty. There are a lot of people who can't problem solve. So the old great granddaddies, and then 6 children fighting over one piece of land, and the land overgrown with bush. When we talk about all the bush unlocks in Barbados and stuff, we have to be honest. And we have to say a lot of that land is sitting in bush because this family member fighting that family member, Nobody wants to pay the money to take care of it, okay? Because there's an ability for the family to come together, have an honest conversation, solve a problem, and move on from the problem. There's a huge lack of emotional intelligence. So going back to how you started the show, people are in the worst moment in their lives, and the best that we can find to say is, oh, well, God punishing people, right? We don't have any empathy, any care, and we like to transfer these things onto the young boys that running around with the motorcycles in Barbados and the van culture and this and that. But the truth is, they are just we produce them. That is our society. That is what it is. Look at how our leaders speak to us. Look at how our leaders behave. It is from the bottom of the society to the topmost tier. Think about how you're treated when you go into a government agency. Think about the complaints for the hospital. People don't have emotional intelligence, okay? And at the end of the day, that is because we're coming out of a system where the Caribbean is created, and emotional intelligence was never something that we needed to have. We've never moved towards becoming a society that is more emotionally intelligent. Of course, you know that we have high levels of domestic violence. We have lots of sexual dysfunction going on in the Caribbean. All the generations that live with undiagnosed or untreated mental illness and wellness issues. And of course, again, like I said, all of this in this society is what we call those generational curses or that generational trauma. And the thing about it is, this is real kicker now. The generational trauma in the Caribbean has become normalized. So we can't even see a thing for what it is. We can't even call a thing because this is normal behavior. So we have our uncle that is 65. And we know this uncle, he accustomed to dealing with, as we would say in Barbados, 18-year-old girls and 19-year-old girls. And we don't look at that. We don't say, well, something is wrong with my uncle. He can't keep a conversation, carry on a conversation with a woman his age, right? He depends on an unequal power balance, because a 60-year-old obviously has more life experience and everything than a 20-year-old. But in the Caribbean, that's being a sugar daddy, right? And up here where I live in Canada, people will look at you very strange. You would feel pressured to do something like that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but what I'm saying is it is a whole lot less acceptable than it is in the Caribbean. So this is the kicker here. When we talk about change in the Caribbean, a lot of our dysfunction has been normalized, okay? And I'm just going to say very quickly, of course, not assuming that people know, domestic violence is an umbrella term. So contrary to popular belief, when I talk about high levels of domestic violence in Barbados, I'm not talking about women beating men, okay? Domestic violence refers to any kind of financial, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse perpetrated against people related by affinity, which is, I love you, use my boyfriend, is your girlfriend, we in love now, we start a house, that is affinity, or consanguinity, which is blood, right? So when we look at the fact that there are many elders in Barbados who are not safe in their homes, pensions being stolen, care not being rendered, and that kind of thing, that is a form of domestic violence. But when we talk about that in Barbados, we separate that out and we call that elder abuse. Elder abuse is a form of domestic violence. And I suggest that we put it all together, because if we put it all together, we'll be able to see the true cycle of violence in Barbados from the cradle to the grave. Okay, so when the AG talks about him not understanding the link, if you don't understand the link, then you don't know how to fix the problem. That's all I'm saying. All right. Okay, why am I not able to move forward?
Yeah, but we're following good. We haven't been able to see your see the slides. We were just seeing the one slide. Well, on my what I'm seeing. However, it's been very clear. Don't worry.
I'm moving all the time and thinking that you can see the slides. Okay, it's fine. I will. Let me just finish up because I only have.
Yeah, we're now seeing it.
Oh, you can see it.
Effects of resilience.
That's interesting. Okay, all right. I'll just leave it in this view if you can see it this way.
Yes.
So remember I said that one of the biggest issues with this whole generational trauma and that kind of thing is what it does to us in terms of this quality of resilience, which is very, very important for us to stay healthy and happy as human beings. right? Resilience is basically the ability, physical and mental, to meet the challenges of life, find strategies and solutions, and move forward. So again, I know it best from the man-woman lens. Not to say we can probably find examples from other lenses, but let's just stick on the man-woman lens because that's the one I know best. So you say to your partner, well, sweetheart, the roof need a little flashbang because when the rain fall, I see a little bit of water run down the wall. What's wrong with you? You so miserable. You always bothering me. Don't stress out me. Stop stressing out me. And you are like, what is going on? This person, this man this is an example of a man who is lacking emotional capacity, the resilience to be able to manage the challenges of life. Whatever it is that has not been cleared, whether it is a childhood issue, whether it is that he is unemployed and is grappling with that, he doesn't have the emotional space to take on more. Okay, there's low resilience. Okay, so think now about what is happening in Venezuela. Think now about Jamaica. Think about Haiti. Think about Cuba. In order to be able to move on from those experiences of violence, you need to be resilient. Well, the challenge in the Caribbean is that, one, resilience is learned. It is learned. Like every other skill in life, it is learned. And we are not teaching, I would suggest. I know about Barbados. I don't know what Trinidad and Guyana are doing in terms of guidance and civics. So let me make this very Barbados specific now. We are not teaching our children in schools resiliency. And the topics and places that you find resiliency in the curriculum would be, I didn't put this one here, but sports teaches children lessons of resilience, guidance, right? In Barbados, when we hear the word guidance, we think we're teaching children how to have sex. And all kinds of wild sex too, not even just the sex that all of us end up having anyway, right? But there are also lessons of resilience built into any good guidance curriculum. And civics, how to move in the society that you live in, how the society works, why you pay taxes, if you want to protest, why a protest march is important, how to get a protest march on the road legally. Many people in Barbados, and maybe that's a segment that you need to do one night, Marcia, take the people through creating a protest march, because there are many people in Barbados who don't know how to do that, right? Because we do not teach these skills. What we more teach, don't come for me, Marcia audience, is the Lord will fix it. Okay? Yes, he might. I guess he does. But we also need to teach our children resilience because it is a learned skill. Okay? So go back to when we were talking about the guy on the bicycle, and we're trying to figure out why he really in through the streets without a care for himself, without a care for the old people that use the road, without a care for other motorists. Why is he doing that? And remember we said that, you know, somebody may have an experience in life and nothing ever happens with them. But if you have a child who's grown up with a number of adverse child experiences, so family instability in the home, probably no strong male figure. Then when he went to school, he isn't doing well in school. So by the time he gets to that 18-year-old boy that we see really in through the street, he really doesn't care. He doesn't care about himself. He doesn't care about other people. So adverse childhood experiences weaken resilience, okay? So when you think of the many young men in Barbados who really feel like the side of the road, the block, is the only place that they belong. It's the only place that they know how to navigate in the society. Of course, you can see the direct link between that and youth violence and dysfunctional behavior, etc., etc. But if you go further and you apply it now to all that we are about to face within the Caribbean, I want to say that there's also a collective component to resilience, right? So if we have lost our way as a Barbados, if we don't remember what it is that grounds us as a people, if we remember that we are supposed to be friends of all and satellites of none, right? Then we lose our ability to be collectively resilient as a people. And because I love to read the chat and what your viewers say, I would love them to tell me if they think that the people of the Caribbean are resilient people. And if we are, why are we? And if we are no longer a resilient people, or if we are not a resilient people, what are some of the things that would account?
Dr. Hinds Mary, I'm going to ask you just to pause there a little bit. And I know that people are getting ready to put their answers in. But you know, I'm hoping that I can break the segment, because I had you for 30 minutes. And then if you can come back, I don't go to fall asleep, please. Don't fall asleep. Because I have Senator Ryan Walters coming to us with some things with the economy.
Cool.
And he's going to, come on. I could give you 3 more minutes, Senator Walters. Give us 3 minutes, because this is mighty good what she's doing. So take 3 minutes. And if you would allow me to bring you back on later in the program, I would really appreciate that, because I think people are getting something from this. So take 3 minutes and don't rush. Take 3 minutes, and then we'll have you come back on. Okay.
Okay. So I want to talk specifically now. Now, bear in mind, I just did a whole analysis of us. My tool of analysis is gender. You can analyze using economics. You can analyze using health. You can analyze the people using a number of mechanisms. Mine is gender. But look at where I come in now. We can talk about disaster and recovery in the Caribbean, and we can apply a gender lens. Gender is not just, all I want a man hating, when I want to hate the man, That is not what it is about. It is a tool of analyzing your society. So I smile when I hear about all the relief efforts in the Caribbean right now, and are we ready for a disaster and this and that. I smile because right now, the only recovery, we have 2 recovery things that we do in the Caribbean right now. We try to get people, like I say, some tin food, and we don't even bear in mind that many people in the Caribbean live with hypertension. That is a part of our generational trauma, right? The levels of stress in our body. You can eat the best in the Caribbean. You can eat whatever. By the time you get 45, you are still dealing with some kind of blood pressure that is elevated. That is an example of how we bring our trauma through our genes and our DNA. There's a connection with diabetes. But our relief effort is to give people some tin food. We don't even level it out with greens and vegetables and that kind of thing. So by the time the people end up coming out of the situation, the food desert that we create makes their health worse. So we don't even have the food down pat when we talk about getting relief to people. The other aspect of our relief is cleaning up. So mopping out the flood water, taking up the galvanized off of the ground. But you know what we don't consider in our disaster and recovery plans in the Caribbean? The emotional element of it, right? And I say here, I don't know if you're seeing the slide, but I'm just going to read it. It says the wind howling outside does not mean the same thing to a person who has lived with holes in the roof as one who has lived in a 2-story house all their lives, right? So when you are accustomed to, when you hear the rain fall, you know that you got to run and get every bucket, every sheet, and put down in the house and try to make sure that, push around the chair in the corner. The rain falling and the wind howling means something completely different to that person than it means to the person who's just going to cuddle up mothers. If you're talking about building low-income housing in Barbados, disproportionately, you're talking about housing women and children, right? Many of whom can't afford more than $850 as a rental. I would say between $850 and $1,200 as a mortgage, right? So when you are stealing through corruption and nefarious means in the context of housing projects in Barbados, you're stealing from the women and children of Barbados. Less. It's the same thing, right? This is why I say it's important for us to not just consider these problems as economic problems, but also to be able to understand how they impact people. And we seem to think that children in Barbados is some kind of category that doesn't include men. Boy, children up until the age of 18 are usually the charges of their single mothers in Barbados, right? So when you're talking about the fact that you're displacing children, go back to the adverse childhood experiences. Go back to the example I gave when you tell the man, the roof there, the water running down and he blow up at you. It might be because the poor man was waiting on one of these houses here and never got it, and had to run from auntie's house to uncle's house, scotching. You know what I mean? And he now comes to a relationship with all of that trauma, has never been able to deal with it. So now everything that happens, it is a blow up in the house without you realizing and understanding. This man is really not coping because of all of his experiences around housing, lack of housing. So I don't want us to think that these things are disconnected. They're all connected, right? Another way that it is connected is when you spend, when you move from $1 million to $4 million on a project, that is $3 million of social service money that you now no longer have, right? So they will tell you the hospital can't function. We don't have this. Where you fill up with gas, you have to spend 10 cents to put with somebody else, 10 cents to buy equipment for the hospital. But this is why we don't have the money to buy the equipment for the hospital. So it is all connected. When you talk about the poor construction, I heard Mr. Walters talking about the poor construction of the houses, and go back to the slide that we were on with disaster preparedness. Now, if we are serious about disaster preparedness in the Caribbean, you can't have poorly constructed houses and you put in people in it when our new normal, whether they're manufactured or not, Marcia, is category 5 hurricanes that what you say cover every one of the 4 criteria for insurance. I mean, you don't want to be in a poorly constructed house. But what you also don't want to do when we're talking about disaster recovery, like we were saying, is only have a disaster management plan that is grounded in getting people tin food and getting galvanized and stuff like that off the ground. What we need is a strong and catered trauma-informed disaster management plan. And I have never heard anybody talking about trauma-informed services. So now that we understand more about trauma and how it affects and impacts all of us as human beings, especially, like I said before, the Black community being one of those groups that, because of our historical experience, faces racial trauma, right? I have never heard anybody talk about disaster management in the Caribbean that is trauma-informed. And it needs to be. Because if you want to make sure that your country does not break under the weight of a disaster, you have to cater that plan to the people that the plan is being made for. It is not like you can go, on somebody else's playbook and just take out the disaster plan and bring it and drop it in the midst of Caribbean people. It doesn't work that way. We haven't done the work either before the disaster and definitely know that we are in, this war, this natural disaster climate in the Caribbean. We're not talking about therapy. We're not normalizing therapy and going to therapy, be that individual therapy, community therapy, family therapy. So when you are talking, I think one of your guests on this show, I think I heard it on the show, where you were looking at different strategies that you can use for communities affected by crime. And one of the strategies that you can use is community therapy, right? People know about individual therapy. People know about family therapy, perhaps. But you can bring that entire community together and help to rebuild and reshape the norms, the values, and address the conflicts that people had. And I think this is one of the strategies that they used. I think it was New York. I don't remember where exactly, but this is one of the strategies. And the people who were administering the therapy were actually trained within the community to provide those services in the community. These are not conversations that we're having either as we talk about fighting crime generally, or being able to prepare and manage the disasters that we're facing in the Caribbean over the next little while. But then if you have a policymaker who says he doesn't understand the connections between the trauma, between the violence, between what people need to get their lives stabilized and that kind of thing after a disaster, it's no wonder that it is missing from the plan, because you can't plan for what you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to think about discussion time as a family activity. And you started it on Friday Night Show, where you were going through checklists of what people should have and think about as they begin to prepare for, and you were talking about, you know, it being similar to preparing for a war or a military strike or whatever. It's similar to preparing for a hurricane. So you make sure you have your canned food, that kind of thing. But what I would say to people is also include family time, discussion time, where people can talk about their fears, where children can talk about their fears. You have to be able to explain these things in very age-appropriate ways, because people will carry that stress if there's not an opportunity to talk about it, right? And the first line of defense is always the family. You can replicate this in workplaces. You can replicate it across community groups or sports groups, gym groups. So we need to really create spaces for people to be able to talk and to say, this is how I feel, to vent if they need to vent, etc., etc. And then I think what is the final slide, I talk about the implications for policy planning, right? Because we could understand this on your show, Marcia, but we don't plan for Barbados. We're not the people whose responsibility it is to be able to do this for Barbados or even Jamaica or Haiti or anything, okay? So we want to make sure that our policymakers are clear that recovery in the Caribbean is more than food and clothes, okay? We want a mental health plan that outlines what is going to happen in the first hours, days, months after the event. And if we have it, then I believe that we should know as the public. Don't wait until we are actually in the crisis to explain to people and tell people, you know, like how we have the advertising that says that the category 1 shelter is XYZ, the category 2 shelter. Tell people. And if you need mental health services, these will be offered at the shelter, at the community center. Don't let's wait until there's a crisis, right? Because people need that support and care immediately. Some people were talking about the reckless things that people were doing in Jamaica. They were walking on the seawall, this. But when you have gone through something like that, people handle shock and stress differently, right? Some people just begin to work off fight or flight. Some people begin to, like, you're just in a shocked state, right? I saw this one picture. You know, you have to be careful with AI. So let me say that right off the bat. I don't know if it was real or if it was AI. But there was this guy during the hurricane. He was on his roof trying to like kind of hold on to some of the galvanized. That is shock, right? Like that is not a rational process. And that is what happens to people when they're dealing with an event like this. So we can't wait until the thing happens to then be telling people when people are shocked and awed and all of this thing, here is what we need to do. We need to have that conversation happening way beforehand. We need to have it in schools. Like I said, we need to have it in community centers. I don't think we're doing any of that in Barbados. I could be wrong, but I don't think we're doing any of it in Barbados, right? People need access to affordable therapy because some of it is going to come out of the hurricane. But like we said before, some of it is there. So when we look back at that question of resiliency in the Caribbean and whether we're resilient or not, I think the answer is yes, we are. And yes, we also are not, because we are coming in with so much generational and historical baggage that anything that happens in the Caribbean, I'm going to say it's going to really destabilize us, because that capacity that many people need to be able to manage what is coming on top of the poverty, on top of the family instability, we just don't have it. We don't have it emotionally. So if you understand that this is where we are, when we are dealing with making a disaster management plan, these are things that we have to consider, right? And apparently these are not the conversations that are going on around the policy table in Barbados, and it is concerning. Establishing additional community resources to enable neighborhood resilience, okay? And this is where, because, you know, people will ask, but who is this Marsha, what she is? All I am is an advocate. I'm a domestic violence advocate, right? And out of that training, I'm able to do this work. I don't have, this is not like, yes, it is an area of research, but it's not my substantive area of research. This is my community work, right? And so what I'm saying is that training can enable the community to be able to come together and make its own resiliency efforts more coordinated. You don't necessarily have to wait for the government or the prime minister or any of these people. We can begin to construct these plans in neighborhoods across the island, right? So that people in their little pods are able to address their own needs and their own concerns. And the final thing that I would say is, obviously it would help if we have policymakers who know and understand the phenomena that they are trying to fix. That is the only reason that they're going to come up with solutions that actually address the problem, and solutions that they don't have to walk back or then come and say, oh, well, we ain't starting it today. We starting it in February. Oh, don't bother. We ain't doing it at all. You don't have a whole set of steel that you've bought and it's there sitting down, and now will not be able to do housing, and now you have to pay somebody over to do it again. It is all the same problem. I want people to be able to think and understand that whether we're talking about social services, the economy, whatever it is, at the end of the day, if you don't have people who take the time to understand and know what it is that they're trying to do for the island, everything is going to be for naught. So I'm sorry I didn't stick to topic.
No. This is brilliant. This is brilliant. And I'm here saying that, you know, wow, there's so much that needs to be done in terms of policy at a policy level. And it's my opinion that we need, this is why we need the diaspora. We need people like yourself, because you're in Canada and you are being exposed to a lot of things, a lot of this kind of work and the policies there in Canada. And you know, your experience, you know, I say to people in the diaspora that when we live it, you live in the diaspora, is that once your mind is expanded, you know, it doesn't come back. And once you've had that experience, you don't really, it doesn't go away. You know it can work. When they're telling you it can't work, you know, because you've experienced it. And that's I believe is what one of the things that's been what has happened to you, Marsha. And I happen to believe, you know, this is very, very, very brilliant tonight. And I'm saying, how does this information go out to all the islands? Because it's not common to Barbados.
Yeah.
You know, it is because the trauma is throughout the region, and it's throughout us as Black people, as you have so ably put it. And Marsha, this was brilliant.
Thank you. The comment there by Kim Tay that some people's mental health have not been treated from what has been happening during the pandemic. So then you end up with compounded trauma, like one thing on top of the other thing, on top of the other thing. And I think that's a part of what we're seeing in Barbados now. Everybody is angry. Everybody's frustrated. There's no resilience, right? And then we end up with the situation that we have, where things just kind of, they're falling apart. Things are falling apart.